On the recording, you can barely hear her at first. A soft, trembling whisper, the kind that comes from someone trying to keep themselves from falling apart. "Caleb, tell me again," the woman says. "Please, tell me it was an accident." There's a long pause, a shaky inhale, then a voice, young, hoarse, drained. "I didn't mean to, Mom," he says. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen." The audio cuts, and suddenly we are pulled backward, away from the interrogation room, into the cold darkness of Riverbend City, Colorado. A small place, the kind you'd pass through without noticing unless you lived there. Rows of aging apartment complexes, old pine trees leaning over cracked sidewalks, and in winter, a kind of silence that makes you think twice before walking anywhere alone. On the night, everything fell apart. The cold had reached the kind of temperature where your breath hangs in the air longer than you'd like, and metal doorknobs sting your skin if you touch them bare-handed. Snow from the previous storm still clung to the edges of the parking lots outside Silver Pines Residences, a modest apartment complex perched just off Cedar Hollow Lane. Inside Building C, apartment 214, Avery Sloan, 23 years old, was already asleep. She had just finished another double shift at St. Helena Medical Center, juggling her nursing degree and part-time work. She'd been exhausted, rubbing her eyes and mumbling something to her roommate before heading into her room around 10:30. Her roommate, Damon Reyes, stayed up a little longer, scrolling through his phone, watching a training video from the gym he worked at, heating leftover pasta in the microwave. Nothing unusual, nothing that hinted at the nightmare only hours away. It was, by all accounts, a normal winter night, and yet, near 4 a.m., in the early, unforgiving dark, a violent scream tore through the walls of the apartment, the kind of scream that makes your gut tighten even before your brain understands what it is, the kind that no neighbor ever wants to hear coming from down the hall. In the grocery store footage taken later that morning, Damon would say he didn't think. He didn't have time to think. He woke up, heart slamming in his chest, disoriented by the noise. At first, he thought Avery was having a nightmare. She'd mentioned once or twice that she had trouble sleeping, that her mind stayed active long after her body gave up. But when Damon stepped out of his bedroom and into the hallway, his feet hitting the cold laminate floor, he saw something he couldn't place. A shadow moving in front of Avery's doorway. For one brief second, he thought it was Avery herself. Maybe she'd turned on a light. Maybe she'd fainted. No. The figure was taller, bulkier, moving with a frantic, unsteady rhythm like someone in a blind panic. Damon didn't have time to put words to what he saw. The shape turned, rushing him. A hand, someone else's hand, grabbed the front of his shirt, shoving him backward so hard his shoulder hit the doorframe. Before he could react, before he could fully understand what was happening, he felt a burning pressure slice across his chest, then his face. A blade. Later, in the hospital, he would say the shock was so deep that the world shrank into a tunnel of flashing lights and raw instinct. He didn't know who the intruder was. He didn't know why this was happening. He didn't even know if Avery was alive. All he knew was that he had to get away. And so he ran, barefoot, shirtless, bleeding, through the small, cramped living room, out the back door of the unit, leaving a streak of blood on the doorframe, down the iced-over steps, gripping the railing as he stumbled, across the courtyard where the snow made his feet numb in seconds. The only light he remembered clearly, the only fixed point in a landscape of panic, was the neon open sign of the 24-hour convenience store across the street. A small brick building with buzzing fluorescent lights and a sleepy clerk who looked up just in time to see a young man, covered in blood, pushing through the glass door. That's when the first call to 911 came in. The clerk's voice shook. "There's a guy. He's hurt. There's blood everywhere. I don't know what happened." Behind him, Damon could be heard breathing hard, trying to speak through shock. "My roommate, Avery, she's still in there. I think someone stabbed her." While dispatchers tried to keep Damon conscious long enough for help to arrive, 2 police units and an ambulance rushed toward Cedar Hollow Lane. Officers Keating and Morris entered the building first. The door to apartment 214 was cracked open, a smear of red on the metal. Inside they found a quiet that felt almost staged, unnatural, heavy, wrong. Then they saw her. Avery Sloane, lying near the entryway, her body twisted, her clothes torn, the ground around her soaked in bright red patterns that had begun to dry unevenly with the heat from the apartment vents. Avery was still alive. Barely. A sound, more breath than the voice, escaped her lips. No words, no names, no final message. She had been stabbed more than 24 times. No one there that night ever forgot the look on her face, the raw terror caught between life and death, the confusion, the struggle to keep breathing. Paramedics moved fast. They lifted her with a kind of rushed gentleness, knowing every second mattered, but by the time the ambulance reached St. Helena Medical Center, Avery's pulse had faded. Not long after, in the back of the vehicle, she slipped away. She never regained consciousness. Back at the apartment, officers began walking through each room, trying to understand what they were seeing. There was blood in Avery's bedroom, blood in Damon's bedroom, blood on the living room floor, smeared in arcs that suggested a desperate, chaotic fight. A kitchen knife, one from Avery's own apartment, lay in the hallway outside her door. Its handle cracked, the blade bent at an unnatural angle. Whoever had used it with incredible force. A piece of cardboard near Damon's room held a partial bloody shoe print. A baseball cap, Aspen Rangers, sat on the floor beside it. Neither item belonged to Damon. Neither belonged to Avery. And most unsettling of all, there was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no splintered frames, no damage, no kicked-in door, no pried-open window. Whoever had entered Avery's home had either found a door already unlocked or had been let in. The detectives on scene exchanged looks that said everything. This wasn't random. It wasn't a break-in gone wrong. Something about this was intimate, intentional, personal, and at the center of it, whether they liked it or not, was the young man they had taken to the hospital, the only person still alive from inside that apartment. Damon Reyes. He was the witness, the survivor, and now, potentially, the #1 suspect. By the time detectives from Riverbend City's Major Crimes Unit arrived at Silver Pine's residences, dawn had just begun touching the tops of the old pine trees. The sun wasn't fully up yet, only a pale, icy glow pushing into the night like a hesitant witness. Most of the complex was still asleep, unaware that a murder investigation was already unfolding just a few doors away. Detective Morgan Elliston, the kind of investigator who rarely flinched at anything anymore, stepped under the yellow crime scene tape and into the narrow hallway of Building C. Years of experience had carved a calm, unreadable expression onto his face. But those who knew him understood one thing. He missed nothing. Not the small details, not the weird ones, and definitely not the ones other people tended to overlook. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Not blood, though there was plenty of it, but the heat. The apartment heater had been running all night, creating a dry metallic warmth that clashed with the cold air drifting in every time a door opened. That contrast always made violent scenes feel even more wrong, like the room itself couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. Inside apartment C214, the scene was a quiet disaster. Officers had already marked the major blood pools with numbered cones, and the crime scene photographer had begun taking wide shots before moving in closer. Elliston crouched near the entryway, careful not to touch anything. "Where was she found?" he asked. Officer Morris pointed. "Here, on her back. Still breathing when we arrived." Elliston studied the dark stains on the laminate floor, noticing the irregular shape of the blood patterns, smeared in arcs, broken by shoe prints, dragged in some places, pooled in others. He traced the path with his eyes like a map. "She tried to crawl," he said quietly. "Looks like it," Morris replied, "or she tried to get up and collapsed." Elliston didn't answer. He didn't need to. The blood told enough of the story. He followed the largest trail into Avery's bedroom. Clothes scattered, one lamp knocked sideways, a pillow on the floor with a deep slice through the fabric. It didn't take special training to see this was where the attack began. The violent energy hung in the air like static. What drew Elliston's attention wasn't the blood itself, but the lack of forced entry. "You check the locks?" he asked. "Front door, back door, windows, nothing broken. Nothing forced." "So someone walked in," Elliston said, "or someone already inside did it." He didn't comment, but the implication hung there. He stepped into Damon's bedroom next. More blood here. Smears on the wall, a few drops on the nightstand, a partial shoe print near the foot of the bed. A chaotic fight, no doubt. Damon's injuries, as EMS reported, were consistent with defensive wounds. Still, Elliston had seen enough cases to know that defensive wounds didn't always mean innocence. Yeah, sometimes attackers hurt themselves in the heat of the moment. Sometimes wounds were self-inflicted. Sometimes people staged scenes, and sometimes the truth sat right between all three. The detectives followed the blood trail through the living room and toward the back door. A long stroke of blood curved along the wall where someone had clearly steadied themselves while trying to escape. Outside the back exit, the trail continued down the metal stairwell. Drops on the railing, drops on the steps, drops on the concrete below, leading toward the courtyard. "Matches the route the roommate described," Morris said. "That doesn't prove it happened the way he said," Elliston replied. "No," Morris agreed, "but it doesn't contradict him either." From there, they followed the trail across the snowy courtyard, a scattered pattern of red on white, ending near the edge of the complex, where footprints disappeared into the street. The detectives crossed into the convenience store parking lot, where another team had already interviewed the clerk and collected the security footage. Elliston stepped inside the store. The fluorescent lights were uncomfortably bright compared to the early morning gloom. The clerk, still visibly shaken, stood behind the counter, clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee. "He came in right through that door," the clerk said, pointing, "barefoot. He was terrified. I mean, he looked like he'd run through a wall." Elliston nodded for him to continue. I asked if he needed help. He said someone attacked him, said his roommate was still inside. I didn't see any weapon. I didn't see anyone chasing him. Just blood. A lot of blood. You call 911 immediately? Elliston asked. Yes, sir. Soon as he came through the door. The footage confirmed it. Damon stumbled through the entrance, panicked, clutching his chest, looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to follow. He wasn't faking that fear, at least not convincingly enough for Elliston to see cracks at first glance. A medic approached the detectives as they exited the store. Reyes is stable enough to talk later today, the medic said. He's got deep lacerations to his fingers, one nearly hit bone, cuts on his chest and cheek. They weren't superficial. Could he have done that to himself? Morris asked. The medic shrugged. Physically, sure, but psychologically, hard to say. The pattern looks more like someone grabbing the blade. Defensive. Elliston folded that away in his mind as a maybe. Back at the apartment, evidence techs had found something Helena knew would matter. A bent kitchen knife from Avery's own collection. The killer didn't bring a weapon. He used one from inside the apartment. That detail changed everything. If the killer didn't break in and didn't bring a weapon, then whoever committed this crime either entered quietly through an unlocked door, was invited in, or already lived there. None of those options made things look better for Damon. Around 7 hours a.m., Elliston gathered the team for a preliminary rundown. Avery Sloan, 23, deceased at St. Helena, multiple stab wounds, no sign of sexual assault, no valuables taken, no forced entry. Murder weapon from inside the home. He paced slowly as he spoke, mapping thoughts. Roommate claims he was attacked. Injuries show defensive wounds, but we need to confirm that. He fled barefoot across the complex, which the scene supports. Witness, the clerk, says he was hysterical. Doesn't look staged. A junior detective raised a hand. Sir, could this be a random intruder? Elliston shook his head. Nothing about this is random. This much violence, this many wounds, this close proximity. This was personal. Someone was furious or terrified or both, and they used what they found in the home. He paused. And if the door was unlocked, we need to know why. Another officer approached with an update. Neighbors say they heard banging on a door around the same time. Woman's voice. Could have been her trying to get help. Anyone open the door? No, sir. Elliston looked down the hallway with a quiet heaviness, calculating how much longer she might have lived if someone had opened up. That's how close these stories get. That's how they break you, if you let them. By the time the sun finally climbed above the rooftops, Avery's body had been taken to the county medical examiner's office, and the apartment was sealed. The investigation had officially begun, and Detective Morgan Elliston already knew what the next step had to be. Talk to Damon Reyes, not in a grocery store doorway, not while he was shaking and bleeding, not while adrenaline drowned out the facts. He needed Damon's story again, calm, detailed, with time to think. Because if Damon was telling the truth, the city had a killer walking free. And if he wasn't, then the killer was already in the hospital waiting for Elliston to ask the right question. By mid-morning, the hallways of St. Helena Medical Center were clearing out from the usual sunrise rush. Nurses changed shifts. Carts rattled against the tile floors, and intercom announcements drifted overhead like faint echoes. But behind one closed door on the hospital's east wing, everything felt still. Too still. Detective Morgan Elliston stood outside room 2 B, flipping through the preliminary report on Damon Reyes. Deep lacerations to the fingers, a defensive cut across the chest, bruising along the left side of his face. Hypothermia risk from running barefoot through the snow, but stable, awake, and, according to the attending physician, alert enough to talk. The detective took a quiet breath before knocking. He had interviewed hundreds of suspects, victims, and witnesses over the years. Some froze, some cried. Some lied until they ran out of breath. Others told the truth so convincingly that Morgan found himself replaying their stories for weeks. But he rarely went into an interview expecting anything. Assumptions, he believed, were how investigators got blindsided. Inside the room, Damon sat upright in a hospital bed, one arm bandaged from wrist to elbow, both hands wrapped neatly by the nurse's careful work. His face was pale, cheeks drawn tight from exhaustion, but his eyes were open, staring at a spot somewhere beyond the window as if the world outside didn't quite feel real anymore. When he saw Morgan step in, he blinked, just once. "Mr. Reyes," the detective said gently, "I'm Detective Elliston. We spoke briefly this morning." Damon nodded without looking away from the window. "Yeah, I remember." "Mind if I sit?" Damon gestured weakly toward the chair near his bed. The detective took it and set his notebook on his knee without opening it. "You've had a rough night," Morgan said. "That's one way to put it." The room slipped into a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable but heavy, like both men understood they were sitting at the edge of something big and fragile. "Damon," Morgan began, tone even, "I need you to walk me through everything again, in your own words. No rush. Start wherever feels right." For the first time since the detective entered, Damon looked directly at him. His eyes were still clouded, still frightened, but there was clarity, too, as if finally someone was asking him the question he'd been replaying over and over since dawn. "It was the screaming," he said. "That's the first thing. I don't know what time exactly. I just know I woke up and it felt wrong, like violent." He swallowed, throat tight. "I didn't think it was real at first. I thought Avery was dreaming. She had nightmares sometimes, but not like that. I got up, I walked into the hallway." He paused, and that's when I saw him. Morgan leaned forward slightly. "Describe him." Damon shook his head slowly. "I couldn't see much. The lights weren't on. He was coming out of Avery's room. Big guy. Maybe my height or taller, wearing dark clothes. I couldn't see his face. It all happened so fast." "What did he do?" "He came right at me," Damon said. "Grabbed my shirt. Hit me in the face. I tried to push him back or move around him, I don't know. Then he stabbed me. I felt it right here." He gestured toward his chest. "Just this sharp, burning pressure." Morgan watched him, noting the tremor in his hands. Trauma, yes, but trauma didn't always equal truth. "I didn't understand what was happening," Damon continued. "I didn't know if Avery was alive. I didn't know who he was. I just reacted. I grabbed the blade at one point. That's how my hand got cut." The detective didn't comment. The medical report supported the claim. "I fell into my room somehow," Damon said. "He came after me. And then there was this moment, just this tiny opening, where he wasn't blocking the doorway anymore. And I ran. I ran as fast as I could." "To the convenience store," Morgan said. "Yes. Why not bang on a neighbor's door?" Damon blinked. "I tried. I hit one door on the way out. Nobody answered. I couldn't keep trying. I thought he was behind me. I didn't feel safe until I saw the store lights." The detective let silence fill the space for a moment. Damon's breathing was uneven, but not unstable. The story matched the physical path investigators had traced earlier. The blood trail, the footprints. The pattern made sense. But sense didn't make it true. Morgan opened his notebook finally. "Let's talk about Avery." Damon's jaw tightened. "How long have you known her?" Morgan asked. "A long time. 5, maybe 6 years. We met at a volunteer event in high school. Stayed in touch. She needed a place to live when she started her nursing program. I had the extra room." "You ever date?" "No," Damon said quickly. "People assume that, but no. We were friends. Close, but not like that." "Any tension between you?" "No." "Arguments? Money issues?" "No." "Did she ever mention being afraid of someone?" That question landed differently. Damon shifted, searching his memory. "No," he said slowly. "Avery wasn't the type to keep things bottled up. If something scared her, she'd say it. She never said anything about someone following her. No creepy ex, nothing like that." Morgan made a note. "What about the doors?" he asked next. "Was the back door usually locked?" "Yeah, always. We both were careful about that. It was unlocked when officers arrived." Damon's brow creased. "I locked it. I swear I did. Every night before bed I double-checked." "Any chance Avery opened it? For someone she knew?" "Not at 4 a.m., Damon said. "She wasn't expecting anyone." Morgan considered that. "Did Avery know anyone who might have had a key?" "No. The landlord keeps spares in his office, but no friends, no exes, no neighbors." "Could you have unlocked it in your sleep?" Morgan asked, not accusing, just exploring. "No." The word came out sharper than Damon intended, but he didn't take it back. Morgan closed his notebook gently. Damon watched him with a quiet tension, like he was terrified of the next sentence. "Damon," the detective said carefully, "you understand, we have to look at every possibility." "I know." Damon's voice cracked on the second word. "But I didn't do this. You have to believe that. You have to." Morgan didn't say he believed him. He didn't say he didn't. He only said, "My job is to follow the evidence, and right now, the only living person who was inside that apartment is you. That means I need every detail you can give me, even if it feels small. Even if it feels impossible." Damon wiped his face with the back of his uninjured arm. "I told you everything I remember." "I'm going to ask you again," Morgan said softly. "Is there anything you're leaving out?" "No?" The detective studied him, the trembling hands, the hollow eyes, the subtle flinches in his shoulders. Trauma made people seem guilty sometimes. Guilt made people look traumatized. Years of experience taught Morgan the difference was paper thin. He stood from the chair. "All right, Damon, that's enough for now. Rest. We'll talk again." Damon exhaled shakily, nodding. As Morgan walked toward the door, Damon spoke again. Quiet, fragile. "Detective, she didn't deserve this." Morgan paused at the doorway. "No," he said, "she didn't." And he stepped out into the hallway, letting the soft click of the door close behind him. Down the hall, the medical examiner's office had just sent a text to his phone. Avery Sloane's autopsy was complete, and according to the M.E., there were already questions, ones that didn't match Damon's story perfectly, and ones that could blow the case wide open. By noon, Detective Morgan Elliston had left the hospital and driven straight down Harbor Parkway toward the St. Helena County Forensic Center, a low concrete building with no windows, built more for function than comfort. Snow still clung to the steps, melting into gray slush as he crossed the walkway and buzzed at the secure door. The message he received earlier from the medical examiner wasn't long, but it didn't have to be. One line was enough. Autopsy completed. There are inconsistencies. That was all Morgan needed to rearrange his afternoon. Inside the facility, he walked down the fluorescent-lit hallway until he reached the exam suite. Dr. Lila Corwin, the county's chief medical examiner, waited for him by the metal prep table. She was in her early 50s, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, a composed face, and the kind of direct, unfazed manner only decades of forensic work could teach. "Morning, Detective," she said, though it was almost 12:30. "Afternoon," Morgan replied. "You sounded urgent." Dr. Corwin handed him a file already tabbed and highlighted. "We finished the full analysis on Avery Sloane, and you're not going to love this." He opened the folder, but didn't immediately read. "Walk me through it." Corwin pulled off her gloves and leaned against the counter. "Cause of death is clear. Multiple sharp force injuries. But the pattern tells a story that doesn't match what Damon Reyes described." "How so?" "For one," she pointed to a diagram, "the directionality of the wounds. Based on angle, depth, and force, Avery's attacker was almost certainly standing over her, not in a face-to-face struggle." Morgan felt a small shift inside his chest. So she wasn't upright? "No," Corwin said. "She was already down or pushed down quickly. Most of the injuries are delivered from above." She tapped one of the charts. "That's not consistent with someone defending themselves from a standing attacker in a hallway." "And the time frame?" Morgan asked. "The injuries are clustered close together. The attack was fast, furious, short window." He absorbed that. Damon had described a chaotic scene, a prolonged fight, stumbling in the dark, grabbing the blade, but the ME's findings suggested something else entirely: precision in the chaos, a quick, overwhelming burst of violence. "That's not the only inconsistency." Corwin turned to another page. "I tested the blood layered on Avery's skin and clothing. We have 3 sources." "3?" Morgan echoed quietly. "Avery's, Damon's, and a third male contributor." A cold, dull weight settled at the base of Morgan's spine. "Are you certain?" "The profile is partial, but strong enough to confirm it's neither of them." She gave him a searching look. Whatever happened in that apartment, there was definitely someone else there. Could it be contamination? Not a chance. The sample distribution matches proximity during the attack. Morgan exhaled slowly and closed the folder. This was the confirmation he'd been hoping for, and the warning he'd been dreading. Damon Reyes wasn't lying about a third person being involved, but that didn't automatically make him innocent. People with guilty consciences often told partial truths. "What else did you find?" he asked. Corwin hesitated. "You need to hear this part carefully." She flipped to another page. "There were bruises on Avery's arms, older ones, at least 3 to 5 days old." "Defensive?" "Possibly. But the distribution looks more like she was grabbed. Hard." "Any sign of restraint?" "No, nothing like that." "Could Damon have caused them?" Corwin shrugged lightly. "Could be. Could also be from her job. Nurses get bruised more than you'd think. Patients pull, grab, panic." Morgan nodded slowly. It was true, hard to interpret. Corwin continued, "But here's the part I can't place. There were faint traces of fabric fibers under her fingernails, not from her bedding, not from her roommate's clothes, and not consistent with the cotton of the hoodie Damon was wearing. What kind of fabric? Wool blend, dark-colored, medium weight, like an outdoor coat or a winter sweater? Morgan made a mental note. Damon had said the man wore dark clothing. Maybe the attacker had been wearing wool. Maybe Avery had fought him more than Damon realized, or more than he wanted to say. Was there anything on Damon's injuries that tells a different story? Morgan asked. Corwin opened the second part of the file. His finger wounds are consistent with grabbing the serrated part of a kitchen knife. I can't say for certain if it was intentional or reflexive, but the pattern supports his version. So he didn't cut himself deliberately, trying to look like a victim. No, these wounds are real, painful, and not easy to fake. Another small but significant piece of evidence pointing away from Damon, or at least away from Damon as the sole attacker. Corwin closed the file gently. Detective, someone else was in that apartment. I'm confident saying that. Morgan looked toward the closed door of the exam suite, imagining the quiet, frozen apartment on Ridgeway Court, the hallway, the overturned lamp, the evidence marker beside Avery's bedroom door, and Damon running barefoot into the snow, bleeding, terrified of what or whom? Thank you, Dr. Corwin, he said finally. But he didn't leave, not immediately. He stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the findings settle before shifting into the next phase of the investigation. Corwin spoke gently. Morgan, whatever this is, it's complicated. He nodded. They always are. Outside, the winter air stung his lungs as soon as he stepped into the parking lot. The sky was a washed-out gray, the sun veiled behind thin clouds. He walked slowly to his car, turning the keys in his hand, thinking. 3 blood sources, a fast, downward attack, fibers from a dark wool garment, and bruises that didn't match Damon's timeline, pieces of a puzzle, but not enough to see the full picture. Morgan got into the car and dialed Sergeant Waters back at the precinct. Tell me you've got something, Waters said. Depends what counts as something, Morgan replied. Waters exhaled. That's encouraging. We have confirmation of a third male's blood. He heard Waters straighten on the other end. And the attack sequence doesn't match Damon's description. The M.E. says the wounds were delivered from above. So the roommate's story doesn't hold. Or he wasn't there to see the worst part. What else? He had defensive wounds consistent with grabbing the blade, and Avery fought someone wearing a wool garment, dark wool. Waters swore quietly. So what now? Morgan shifted into drive. Now we pressure test Damon's story, and we start looking for a man with recent cuts, bruises, or behavioral changes. Should we pull CCTV from the neighborhood? All of it, Morgan said. Traffic cams, convenience stores, gas stations. If someone fled on foot, there's a chance they crossed a camera. And the neighbors. Re-interview every single one. Morgan paused, then added, and pull anyone with a criminal history in a 5-mile radius, even petty theft. This feels impulsive, not professional. You think the guy's local? He didn't break in. He walked in through an unlocked door. That suggests familiarity with the building or the people inside. Waters was quiet for a moment. We'll get started. Morgan ended the call but didn't drive. Not yet. Instead, he stared out the windshield at the forensic center, letting his mind settle into the patterns he'd trained for over decades. Damon Reyes wasn't cleared, not by a long shot. But the shadow in that hallway, the one Damon swore he saw, was real, and somewhere in the snowy sprawl of St. Helena County, that man was still out there. By late afternoon, the winter sky above St. Helena had shifted into the dull steel blue color that always signaled another snowstorm on the way. Traffic thickened along Harbor Parkway, headlights flickering against the blowing flurries. Detective Morgan Elliston ignored the growing weather advisory pinging on his phone and drove straight back toward Ridgeway Court, the apartment complex where everything had begun just hours earlier. He had already been to the crime scene once that morning, but now, with the autopsy results in hand, the place took on a different meaning. Evidence that seemed routine suddenly carried weight. Overlooked details might now be essential, and the narrative Damon Reyes had given, the panic, the chaos, the chase, needed to be retested against a new set of hard facts. When Morgan pulled into the lot, squad cars and a mobile forensics van were still parked near the building. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered lightly in the icy wind. A pair of uniformed officers stood guard at the stairwell leading to the second floor. As he approached, Officer Keaton nodded. "Detective, thought you'd gone home by now?" Morgan shook his head. "Not tonight." He climbed the stairs slowly, boots scraping gently against the concrete dusted with snow. When he reached Apartment 2B, he paused, not for dramatic effect, but to settle his mind. The second walk-through was always different. You no longer walked in as an observer, you walked in as a hunter of missing pieces. Inside the apartment, the air was colder than he remembered. The heat had been turned off, and the faint scent of metal, blood, though long dried, still lingered beneath the sterile chemical smell from the cleanup crew. Forensic tech Evan Rourke stood in the living room, carefully photographing a set of footprints marked with evidence flags. "You're back," Rourke said. "We have more questions," Morgan replied. "A lot more." Rourke set down his camera. "Let me guess. The autopsy didn't line up." "Not even close," Morgan said. "We have a third male contributor, and the attack wasn't long. It was quick, controlled." Rourke let out a quiet breath. So Damon wasn't lying about someone else being here. "He wasn't lying about someone else being in the apartment," Morgan corrected. "He could still be lying about a lot more." Rourke nodded. Investigators learned early that partial truth was often more dangerous than a clean lie. "Let's start in her room," Morgan said. They walked down the narrow hallway toward Avery Sloane's bedroom, stepping around markers and paper placards placed earlier that morning. The door was half open, as it had been when first responders found her. The room itself was small, single bed, a narrow dresser, textbooks stacked neatly on the floor. Morgan didn't look at the bed. Instead, he stared at the floor, at the pattern. The angle of the evidence markers told a story. The drops were clustered. The directionality angled. The pool near the edge of the carpeted area was deep, and everything pointed inward. A fast, downward attack, not a frantic scuffle, not someone stumbling into the hallway. Corwin's voice echoed in his mind. She was already down, or pushed down quickly. Morgan crouched near the threshold, tracing his eyes along the gouge on the floor, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. A shallow indentation in the laminate, not deep enough to be dramatic, just enough to matter. "Knife strike," he murmured. Rourke leaned closer. "You think she fell here?" "She was pushed," Morgan said quietly. "Hard." He stood and walked toward the dresser. Something about the placement of objects looked wrong, not like a robbery, not like a struggle, just disturbed, artificially, as if someone had touched things without purpose. "Rourke, dust all of this again, every surface. I want secondary prints." "We already pulled primary prints," Rourke replied. "Only Damon and Avery." "Primary prints tell us who lived here," Morgan said. "Secondary prints tell us who didn't plan to stay." Rourke nodded, reaching for his gear. Morgan stepped out into the hallway next, running his fingers lightly along the wall. He stopped at a faint smear just above waist height. It wasn't blood, too pale for that. Not dust either, fibrous. He leaned in. "Get me a fiber kit," he called. Rourke brought one over, and Morgan lifted the smear gently with a tape lift. Under the light, the fragment revealed itself. Dark, fine, wool blend, almost identical to the type Dr. Corwin had mentioned. "And there he is," Morgan whispered. "Not Damon, not Avery, the third man." Rourke watched him. "Could be nothing." "Or it could be everything," Morgan said. "This came from someone brushing against the wall on his way out." Rourke took a slow breath. "We're closer than we were this morning." Morgan didn't respond. His attention had shifted to the back door, the lock, the frame. The faint scuffs along the paint that didn't match the routine wear of the apartment. He opened the door and stepped onto the narrow service stairwell. Snow had blown in lightly across the top step, but there was a space near the railing where the snow was thinner, not melted, disturbed, a footprint, not clear enough to match a shoe yet. But the depression pattern showed depth, weight, and direction. Someone had exited this way, fast, and recently. Rourke stepped out behind him. "We didn't document this." "You couldn't have," Morgan replied. "This wasn't visible this morning. Fresh snow filled the first layer. These impressions, they're on top of the new snowfall." Rourke frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Morgan said quietly. "The third man may have returned." Rourke's eyes widened. "Why would he come back?" "To see what we found. To see if anything could tie him here. People revisit crime scenes more often than you'd think. Not just killers, burglars, arsonists, anyone who panics afterward." Morgan knelt, examining the print. Male shoe, size around 10 or 11, standard winter tread, nothing unique. "But we know one thing," he added. "He's local enough to come back." That changed everything. They weren't looking for a drifter, not a stranger passing through. Someone close, someone who felt safe enough to return to the scene, someone confident, or reckless, or both. Morgan stood and stared out across the back lot. Apartments lined the perimeter. Cars with snow-covered roofs sat untouched. A few windows glowed faintly behind curtains. Somewhere out there, hidden among these buildings, a man with fresh cuts and unsteady nerves might be watching. Because killers didn't just disappear. They lingered. Back inside the apartment, Morgan walked toward Damon's bedroom. The detective stepped into the small space, noting the unmade bed, the open closet, the prints on the floor from Damon's frantic escape. He looked toward the corner, where the cardboard with the partial shoe print had been found earlier. He crouched. He stared. The cardboard was standard moving box cardboard, folded once. Damon claimed it had been from a delivery, but something about the placement bothered him now. The piece was propped against the door, angled in a way that suggested it wasn't dropped by accident. "What are you thinking?" Rourke asked from behind him. Morgan stood slowly. "I'm thinking someone used this to wedge the door," he said. "Either to keep it from shutting or to keep someone inside. Rourke's face tightened. Then Damon may still be telling the truth, Morgan finished, but part of his story doesn't fit. Someone controlled the movement inside this space. Rourke exhaled. So what now? Morgan took a final slow look around the apartment. We find the man wearing the wool coat, he said. We match the footprint. We run the third DNA profile against every county sample we've ever collected. Rourke nodded. And if that doesn't work? He asked. Morgan headed for the door. Then, he said softly, we look for the man who returned. He stepped out into the hallway, leaving the apartment in silence, its secrets no longer buried, but waking up, piece by piece. Snow was falling harder by the time Detective Morgan Elliston returned to the precinct, thick flakes drifting sideways through the wind, coating the streetlights in a hazy glow. He brushed the snow off his coat as he stepped inside, the sudden warmth of the station's air clashing against the icy chill that clung to his sleeves. Inside, the major crimes office buzzed at a low, steady hum, phones ringing, officers typing, coffee machines hissing. But everything seemed to quiet the moment Morgan walked in, carrying the weight of his discovery like it was strapped across his shoulders. Sergeant Dan Waters was waiting for him near the caseboard, arms crossed, eyes pinned to a cluster of photos from Avery's apartment. You look like you found something, Waters said. Morgan removed his gloves slowly. I found a fresh footprint on the back stairwell. Waters cursed under his breath, meaning the guy came back. Morgan nodded. Recently, after the first sweep, after the snow stopped, he was watching the scene or checking something. Either way, he didn't run far. Waters straightened, the tension settling between them. We pulled footage like you asked. Everything within 4 blocks. Traffic cams, convenience store feeds, apartment CCTV, and Waters motioned for him to follow. They moved into the digital forensics room, where IT tech Brianna Tate sat before a wall of screens, each showing different time stamps and angles, parking lots, lobby entrances, sidewalks lined with slush. Detective Elliston, she said, pushing her glasses up, I've got something. Maybe not everything, but something. What am I looking at? Morgan asked. Brianna tapped a keyboard. One screen enlarged, showing the back alley behind Ridgeway Court, the same route Damon Reyes claimed he fled through before reaching the convenience store. This is from the housing complex 1 block down, she said. Timestamp, about 8 minutes after Damon shows up at the store. Morgan leaned in. The image was dark and grainy, the security camera struggling with the low light and sleet, but a silhouette moved through the alley, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a dark wool coat. Morgan's pulse tightened. Freeze it, he said. Brianna paused the footage. The figure was half-turned, face blurred beyond recognition, but the posture, the build, the momentum of the stride. Can you enhance? Waters asked. Not meaningfully, Brianna said, but there's more. She played a second clip, this one from a camera above the side entrance of a laundromat. The same figure passed under the weak glow of a neon sign. Here, the coat appeared clearer, not pristine, slightly worn, heavy wool, charcoal gray, not unusual, but not cheap either. That's consistent with the fibers we lifted from the hallway wall, Morgan said. And the height? Waters asked. Roughly 6 feet, Brianna confirmed, plus or minus an inch. Waters looked at Morgan. So not Damon? No, Morgan said. Not Damon. Brianna pulled up a third feed, traffic camera footage from Harbor Parkway. This time, the figure moved quicker, shoulders hunched, head down against the falling snow. Something else caught Morgan's attention immediately. "Back that up 2 seconds," he said. Brianna rewound the footage. "Stop." Morgan stepped closer. The man's right hand was tucked into his coat pocket, but the left hand, the one swinging low as he walked, was wrapped in a cloth or makeshift bandage. Something dark stained the fabric. Waters squinted. "Is that blood?" Morgan finished. "Fresh." Waters cursed again. "So the third man is injured." "Badly enough to wrap his hand, not badly enough to stop walking." Morgan folded his arms, thinking. Damon said the attacker came at him with a knife, that he grabbed the blade at one point. But what if he wasn't the only one who grabbed it? Waters frowned, meaning the guy who killed Avery might have cut himself in the struggle. Morgan nodded. Which fits the ME's findings, fits the timing, fits everything. "This guy's out there," Waters muttered, "walking around with a bleeding hand and a wool coat." "And he was confident enough to return to the scene," Morgan added. "That tells me he either lives close or he's unraveling." Waters rubbed his forehead. "All right, we put out a bolo for a male 6 feet, heavy build, wearing a dark wool coat and possibly hand injuries. Hospitals, urgent care, clinics, anyone showing up with deep cuts." Brianna cleared her throat. "There's one more thing." They turned. "This last clip isn't great," she said, "but watch." She opened a fourth feed, this one from the Ridgeway Court lobby camera, time-stamped 1 hour before Damon's 911 event. A door opened. A figure stepped inside. Not Damon, not Avery, the same height, same build, same coat. But he didn't go upstairs immediately. Instead, he paused, turning slightly toward the camera. His head stayed lowered, face shadowed by the hood of the coat, but there was one detail the others had missed. On this feed, the man held a small object in his right hand. Brianna zoomed. The image pixelated, but the silhouette was unmistakable. A key. Waters blinked. "You've got to be kidding me." Morgan's stomach dropped slowly. "He didn't slip in through an unlocked door," the detective said. "He had a key." "That means—" Waters began. "He knew the apartment," Morgan said. "He knew Avery, or knew someone who had access." Waters stared at the screen. "So now we're looking at a personal connection." Morgan ran a hand over his jaw. "Or someone who stole a key, someone who knew the layout, someone who didn't need to break in because the door would open for him." A chill, not from the weather, spread through the room. Brianna turned back to her computer. "I'll pull every key issued by that building's landlord in the last year. Maintenance logs, lock change requests, spare key access." "Do it fast," Morgan said. Waters looked at him. "Where do you want to go?" Morgan grabbed his coat. "Back to the landlord." Waters' eyes widened. "You think he—" "I think somebody in that building has more keys floating around than they should," Morgan said. "And someone used one to walk straight into Avery Sloane's apartment." Waters nodded slowly. "And walk out again, after killing her." Morgan exhaled, with a bleeding hand and a wool coat. He turned to leave, pushing the precinct door open into the freezing evening. As snow swirled around him, the case shifted again, this time into something personal, something intimate, something far closer than the detectives had allowed themselves to imagine. The killer wasn't a stranger, not anymore. He was someone who had been inside those walls before, someone who belonged just enough to blend in, someone who might even be watching them now. By the time Detective Morgan Elliston reached Ridgeway Court leasing office, the storm had settled into a quiet, steady snowfall. Not heavy, but persistent. Soft flakes drifting like dust under the parking lot lights. Coating the roofs of cars in the office awning, he stepped inside the small building, shaking the snow from his coat. The interior was warm, lit by yellow bulbs that hummed faintly against the hum of an old radiator. A faint smell of coffee and floor cleaner hung in the air. Behind the desk sat Martin Kellerman, the building's landlord. Mid-60s, wiry frame, thinning white hair, cautious brown eyes. His reading glasses perched halfway down his nose as he typed slowly on an aging desktop computer. When he looked up and saw Morgan, he stiffened, not with guilt, but with the quiet anxiety of someone who had been reading the news and dreading a police visit. "You must be the detective handling the situation upstairs," Kellerman said, voice low. "Yes," Morgan replied. "I need to talk about your key system." Kellerman swallowed hard. "I told the other officers earlier, none of the locks in that building are faulty. No break-ins on record. I didn't think—" Morgan raised a hand gently. "I'm not here to accuse you of negligence, but I need clarity. How many keys exist for apartment 2B? Kellerman removed his glasses, wiping them with a cloth. 2 for the tenants, 1 master key for maintenance, and a backup set in the office safe. "Who has access to the safe?" "Just me," Kellerman said, "and my property supervisor, Evan Mallory. But Mallory's been out recovering from knee surgery. Haven't seen him since early November. Anyone else have access? Cleaning crew? Contractors?" "No," Kellerman insisted. "The safe stays locked." Morgan nodded, but didn't write anything down. "And the master key?" Kellerman hesitated a fraction too long. "It should be hanging in the maintenance room," he said. "But, well, I should probably show you." He pushed himself up from his chair and motioned for Morgan to follow him through a side door into a narrow hallway. At the end was a small utility space lined with keys hanging on labeled hooks. Kellerman pointed to a section marked Master Access. 4 hooks, only 3 keys. Morgan's voice was calm but firm. "Where's the missing one?" Kellerman swallowed again. "That's the thing. A few weeks ago I noticed it wasn't there. I assumed Mallory took it home or forgot to log something. I meant to call him about it, but I didn't want to bother him while he was recovering." Morgan studied the empty hook. "Do you know when it disappeared?" "Not exactly." Kellerman rubbed his forehead. "Somewhere between late October and mid-November. I can check the logs, but—" "Do that," Morgan said. "Immediately." Kellerman hurried to the office, leaving Morgan alone in the maintenance hallway, staring at the empty space where a key, one simple piece of brass, should have been. A key that opened Avery Sloane's apartment. A key that could fit the timeline, that could explain the attacker's quiet entry. That could explain why there was no forced break-in. Morgan's phone buzzed. He answered. "Elliston." It was Sergeant Waters, voice tense. "We got the preliminary fiber analysis back from the hallway smear you collected," Waters said. "It's a high-end wool blend. Brand looks like it belongs to a line sold at Redford & Co. Morgan recognized the name. A luxury menswear store downtown. Pricey. The kind of coat someone either saved up for or stole. "Anyone from the building report missing clothing?" he asked. "Not yet. But here's something else. You're going to want to sit for this one." Morgan didn't sit. "What is it?" "The camera footage Brianna pulled. She scrubbed through earlier timestamps. There's a segment from last week, pre-incident. where the same wool coat guy shows up near Ridgeway Court. Morgan felt the shift in his chest again, a quiet, controlled drop. What time? 12:17 a.m., 6 days before Avery was killed. What was he doing? He walked up to the door, waited, stood there a while, then left. Did he go inside? No. Morgan exhaled slowly. The pattern was changing. This wasn't opportunistic, not random, not someone passing through. This man had come before. He was watching. Waters, Morgan said. Does the footage show whether he made contact with anyone? That's the interesting part, Waters replied. As he's leaving, he passes a guy coming into the building. Which guy? Mallory, Waters said. Your recovering maintenance supervisor. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Is that confirmed? We ran the face. It's Mallory. Morgan ended the call and returned to the office, where Kellerman was flipping through the key logs with trembling hands. Detective, I'm not seeing Mallory's signature on the master key log since October. It's possible he didn't use the room at all. Where is Mallory now? Morgan asked. Kellerman blinked. Home, I assume. Apartment 1D. In this building? Yes, Kellerman said weakly. He lives here. The storm seemed to hush outside, as if the world itself had frozen into silence. Show me his file, Morgan said. Kellerman handed over a folder. Mallory's ID photo stared back. Mid-30s, dark hair, strong build, close enough to the silhouette from the cameras to raise every alarm. He hasn't worked in weeks, Kellerman said. The surgery. Does he have a wool coat? Morgan asked. I think so. I've seen him wearing something like that in cold weather. Morgan closed the folder. Call Waters, he said. Tell him to send a unit. What are you going to do? Kellerman asked. Morgan didn't answer immediately. He stood still for a moment, letting the pieces settle. A missing key, a man with building access, a man who crossed paths with a hooded figure a week before the murder, a man who lived one floor below Avery and Damon, a man recovering from an injury, one that conveniently kept him home and unavailable for questioning. I'm going to talk to Mallory, Morgan said. The hallway to apartment 1D was dim, lit by a flickering overhead light that buzzed with age. Morgan's footsteps echoed softly on the carpet as he approached the door. Dark wood, slightly chipped paint, a fading Christmas wreath still hanging, even though the holiday had passed. He knocked once. Silence. Knocked again. Harder. A rustle inside. A faint thump. Movement, slow, uneven. Finally, the door cracked open. Evan Mallory stood behind it, late 30s, heavy wool coat hanging on a chair behind him, dark circles under his eyes, hair unwashed, left hand wrapped in a bandage. Detective, he said quietly. Everything okay? Morgan studied the bandage. Rough recovery? Mallory swallowed. Yeah, knee surgeries, not fun. Morgan nodded, gaze steady. Mind if I ask where you were the night of the incident upstairs? Mallory hesitated, and in that hesitation the entire hallway seemed to tighten around them. I was home, he said. No visitors? No. Morgan's eyes flicked toward the coat on the chair. Wool, charcoal, the same cut, the same shade, the same brand tag faintly visible inside the collar. Evan, Morgan said softly, we need to talk. Mallory didn't speak. He just lowered his eyes, slowly, heavily, as if he'd been anticipating this moment for days, as if he'd been waiting for the knock on the door. Detective Morgan Elliston had been in countless interrogation rooms over the years, rooms that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, rooms with one table, two chairs, and fluorescent lights that buzzed like they were keeping secrets of their own. But as he walked into interview room 3 with Evan Mallory sitting quietly across the table, he knew immediately that this wasn't going to be one of the routine ones. Evan's posture was rigid, but not defensive. More like someone waiting for bad news he'd already anticipated. His wrapped left hand rested on the table, fingers flexing slightly under the bandage. His right knee, supposedly recovering from a surgery, bounced a little under the table, either from nerves or pain. Maybe both. Morgan sat opposite him, placing a recorder on the table. Not for intimidation, but procedure. Evan, for your awareness, this interview is being recorded. You understand? Evan nodded once. Yeah. Morgan leaned back slightly, giving him space. You're not under arrest. You're here voluntarily. But I need straight answers. I know, Evan murmured. I figured this was coming. Morgan studied him for a long beat. No aggression, no outward signs of guilt. Just a tired, haunted expression, like a man who'd been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. Let's start simple, Morgan said. Tell me about your hand. Evan hesitated. I burned it on the stove. Morgan's voice remained even. A burn doesn't require a pressure wrap like that. The ER notes show abrasions and a cut deep enough to require closure. Want to try again? Evan's knee stopped bouncing. I cut it, he said quietly, on broken glass. Morgan didn't blink. What glass? From a picture frame I dropped. Morgan opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. A freeze frame from the security footage Brianna Tate retrieved. The silhouette of a man walking through the snow. Dark wool coat. Left hand wrapped in cloth. This you? Morgan asked. Evan stared at the picture a moment, then exhaled, rubbing his forehead with his good hand. Detective, I don't know what to tell you. That's not... Morgan didn't interrupt him. He waited. Silence made people talk, and Evan did. I've been home most nights, I swear, recovering. I don't go out unless it's important. Morgan nodded once. Then let's talk about the key. Evan froze. Morgan continued. The master key for Avery Sloane's unit is missing. You're one of 2 people who had access to that storage. And yesterday, footage shows you crossing paths with the man in the coat a week before the attack. Evan swallowed. I don't even know who that guy is. Maybe, Morgan said, but you know a lot more than you're saying. Evan looked up slowly, eyes tired, conflicted. Detective, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Am I a suspect? Morgan didn't sugarcoat it. You're a person of interest. That's not the same thing. Evan nodded. But it feels like the same thing. Morgan leaned forward slightly. Help me understand why a key went missing. Help me understand the footage. Help me understand your hand. If you're not involved, I need something from you that helps me clear your name. Evan's voice cracked. I'm trying. Then try harder, Morgan said, not harshly but firmly. Right now, you're the only person in this building whose story has holes. Evan looked down at his bandaged hand. For a moment, he seemed like he might shut down completely. But then he inhaled, slow, shaky, and said something Morgan didn't expect. Fine, he whispered. You want the truth? I'll try. Morgan waited. Evan's fingers tapped the table lightly. I knew Avery. Morgan raised a brow. How well? Not like that. Not romantically. She was kind. friendly. She'd say hello when everyone else ignored me. Sometimes she'd drop off a package at my door if it was left outside. We talked in the laundry room a few times. Morgan didn't comment. He wanted Evan to keep talking. She was good, Evan said quietly. You could tell. Some people just light up a building, you know? Morgan had heard descriptions like that before in cases involving obsession, but he didn't jump to conclusions. Avery ever mentioned feeling uncomfortable around you? He asked. No, Evan said quickly. Never, and I never made her uncomfortable. Morgan nodded. What about Damon Reyes? I barely talked to him. He was polite, stayed to himself. And the man in the coat? Morgan asked. Evan closed his eyes for a moment, as if searching his memory. I swear to you, I don't know who that is. Then why did you look shocked when I showed you the footage? Morgan asked. Evan hesitated. Because I saw him once. Morgan's pulse tightened. Where? Outside, Evan said. Near the dumpsters, late at night. Maybe 2 weeks ago. I came down for air. My knee was killing me. And I saw this guy just standing there, kind of watching the building. Morgan's jaw tightened. Why didn't you report it? Because, Evan swallowed, because I wasn't sure he was doing anything wrong. People cut through the lot all the time, and I didn't want Kellerman thinking I was complaining about everything. Morgan studied him. Was that before or after the master key went missing? Evan's throat bobbed. Around the same time. Morgan stayed silent. Evan finally met his eyes. Detective, the key. I didn't take it. I know how that sounds, but I didn't. I noticed it missing, too. I thought maybe Kellerman had it. He paused. But I didn't want to be the one blamed for it. Because you were alone in the building most nights? Yes. And you were injured? Yes. And you lived 1 floor below the victim? Yes. Morgan folded his hands. Evan, none of this works in your favor. I know, Evan said suddenly, his voice raw, but I didn't hurt Avery. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Detective, I heard something that night. Morgan's eyes sharpened. What exactly? A scream, a man's voice, not Damon's. Evan blinked hard. I've heard Damon talk 100 times picking up packages or walking the stairwell. This wasn't his voice. Morgan felt the shift, the smallest tilt in the balance of truth. When did you hear it? He asked. Maybe minutes before Damon ran out. Evan said. I was awake. My knee was throbbing. And then I heard the slam upstairs. A man yelling something I couldn't make out. Morgan's heart beat harder, not out of excitement, out of confirmation. The story wasn't making Evan look guiltless, but it was consistent with something more important. There really was a third man inside the building. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Morgan asked. Evan closed his eyes. Because I didn't want to be dragged into this, and because I was scared. The screaming, Detective, it wasn't normal, it wasn't anger, it was... His voice trembled. It was like someone losing control. Morgan's jaw tightened slowly. And there's more, Evan whispered. Morgan waited. That coat, Evan said. The one in the footage? I saw it earlier that week. On someone who wasn't a tenant. Morgan leaned forward. Who? A courier, Evan said. Delivery guy for one of the tenants on the ground floor. I saw him twice. Big guy, same build, same coat, but I never got a good look at his face. A delivery courier, tall, strong, wool coat, access to the building, unfamiliar enough to avoid suspicion, familiar enough to blend in. Morgan felt the case moving again, not straight, but in a new direction. a direction that finally made sense. He stood, gathering the files. "Evan," he said quietly, "if you're lying, I'll know." "I'm not," Evan whispered. Morgan nodded once. "Then you may have just given us our first real lead." He turned to leave the room, and behind him, for the first time since the interview started, Evan Mallory looked less like a suspect, and more like a man who had been afraid of the same shadow Morgan had been chasing since dawn. The snowstorm finally broke sometime past midnight, leaving the city of St. Helena washed in a cold silver glow. Street lamps reflected off frozen sidewalks, cars sat buried under thin sheets of ice, and smoke drifted in lazy curls from apartment chimneys. But inside the precinct's major crimes unit, there was no sense of calm. Detective Morgan Elliston stood over a cluttered evidence table, hands braced on the edge, eyes scanning the data they'd gathered so far. Missing master key, wool fiber match, camera footage of a man with a bandaged hand, Evan Mallory's uneasy confession about seeing a courier in a similar coat, and most importantly, a stranger with access. Sergeant Dan Waters walked in, holding 2 folders and a steaming cup of black coffee. "You're going to want to see this," he said, placing the folders down. "Pulled every delivery log from the tenants on the first and ground floors for the last 3 months." Morgan straightened slowly. "And," Waters tapped the first folder, 3 different courier services, dozens of names, but only one name repeats, across 4 deliveries. Morgan opened the folder. Jonathan Crestwood, independent courier, 38, no major record, 1 minor theft charge from years back. "What was he delivering?" Morgan asked. "Packages, mostly online orders, nothing suspicious. But the timing is what matters." Waters pointed at the dates. "He made 4 drop-offs in the 2 weeks before the murder, twice at apartment 1A, once at 1C, and once at 2A, the unit across from Damon and Avery." "Did Avery ever receive a package?" Morgan asked. Waters shook his head. "None that we could find." Morgan frowned. "But he was inside the building, and he had reason to come back." Waters nodded. "Mallory said he saw a courier wearing a charcoal wool coat. Same build, same stride. And get this, Crestwood's license photo? He's about 6 feet tall, solid frame, and he's got a history of switching part-time jobs. Courier work fits." Morgan set the file down. "Address? Last known? A rental about 2 miles from Ridgeway Court, but he's behind on payments and not responding to the landlord." "Of course he's not," Morgan muttered. "He's running." Waters opened the second folder. "And here's the kicker. Crestwood used to work at Ridgeway Court's maintenance contractor 3 years ago. He did temp work, apartment repairs. He'd have been familiar with the locks, keys, routines." Morgan's pulse tightened. "Meaning he could have made a copy," Waters said. "Or taken the master," Morgan added quietly. The theory clicked into place, not with fireworks, but with the cold, steady certainty of something that had been true for far too long. A former maintenance temp, a courier returning to the building with plausible access, frequenting the ground floor, walking the halls, watching, learning patterns, not enough to blend fully, just enough to not raise suspicion. "Where is he now?" Morgan asked. Waters pointed at the map on the board. "His last phone ping came from a cell tower near the industrial district. After that, nothing. Could have dumped the phone, could have switched it off, could have smashed it." Morgan rubbed his jaw. "So he's moving." Waters nodded. "But not far. We canvassed the area. Tech says his old car hasn't been registered anywhere outside the county. my guess. He's lying low. Somewhere he knows. Morgan sighed. We need eyes on his residence. We've got units headed there now, Waters said. But, Detective, there's more? He handed Morgan a printed screenshot. Grainy, low res, but unmistakable. A camera capture from the rear alley of Ridgeway Court. The man in the wool coat. Crestwood. Same build, same stride. Left hand wrapped in makeshift cloth. Walking hurriedly, shoulders hunched, eyes cast downward, time stamped just minutes after Damon fled to the convenience store. This is our guy, Waters said. Morgan stared at the page. His heartbeat slowed. Not relief, not triumph. Something heavier, something colder. Catching the man wouldn't bring Avery back. It wouldn't undo what Damon had gone through. It wouldn't erase the fear this man had dragged into that building. But it would mean the truth was coming closer. We move now, Morgan said, grabbing his coat. If Crestwood's smart, he'll try to slip out of town before sunrise. 30 minutes later, Morgan and Waters pulled up outside Crestwood's listed address, a weather-beaten duplex with peeling paint and a sagging porch. No lights showed through the windows. A thin layer of snow covered the walkway, undisturbed. He's not here, Waters muttered. Let's check anyway, Morgan said. They approached the door, boots crunching through ice. Morgan knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. Waters tried the doorknob. Locked. Morgan stepped back. Get the landlord. Already on it. 5 minutes later, an older woman with a heavy coat and red knit scarf approached with a bundle of keys. She unlocked the door, stepped back, and whispered, He hasn't paid rent in a month. Comes and goes at weird hours. Never complained, never talked. Morgan nodded and pushed the door open. The inside was cold, not abandoned, but close. A mattress on the floor, a half-eaten bowl of cereal beside it, a pile of jackets in the corner, tools, boxes of screws, electrical tape, small remnants of his old maintenance work. Waters swept a flashlight across the room. Check this out, he said softly. Morgan approached. On the table sat a stack of mail, including a shipping label for Redford & Coars, the luxury menswear store. He picked it up. Wool blend winter coat, delivered 3 months ago. Matches the fiber, Waters said. Morgan continued searching. In the bathroom, Waters found something else, a small scrap of white cloth in the trash. Stained, torn, not graphic, but unmistakably part of the bandage Crestwood used on his hand. Morgan exhaled. We missed him by hours. Waters nodded grimly. Maybe minutes. Morgan scanned the kitchen counter next. A notebook sat open. Nothing alarming at first. Addresses, route notes, maintenance reminders from years earlier, but one page sat dog-eared. Morgan turned the page. His stomach tightened. Scribbled in block handwriting, Ridgeway, 2B Thurs, 4 a.m., watch for lights. Quiet entry. Waters looked over his shoulder. He planned it. Morgan didn't speak. Under the writing was a rough sketch of the building layout, and beneath that, a list of tenants, including Avery's name, underlined twice. Morgan closed the notebook slowly. We need to put out a county-wide alert, he said. Crestwood knows we're closing in. He's going to move fast. Waters grabbed his radio. I'll notify dispatch. Morgan stepped back into the cold night air, looking up at the swirling snow. Crestwood wasn't running aimlessly. He was running with purpose. And somewhere, maybe in the industrial district, maybe hiding in plain sight, he still had the missing key. And the last chapter of this case was coming. Fast. The morning after the search of Jonathan Crestwood's duplex broke cold and brittle over St. Helena. Ice glazed the streets in a glossy sheen, and the city felt lulled into an uneasy stillness, like the breath before an impact. But inside the precinct, still smelling faintly of overworked coffee machines and wet coats, there was nothing still about Detective Morgan Elliston's mind. He hadn't slept. His body reminded him of that. Stiff shoulders, dry eyes, and a creeping lethargy behind his temples. But his mind stayed razor-sharp. Cases like this didn't allow rest, not when a man like Crestwood was out there, unpredictable and wounded, clutching a mastery of access and routine like a weapon in itself. Morgan stood in front of the investigation board, reviewing everything pinned to it. Photos of Ridgeway Court, Avery's smiling portrait, the grainy frame of Crestwood in his charcoal coat, the handwritten notes from his duplex. All of it pointed in one direction. Crestwood didn't run without a plan. He wasn't impulsive, he was methodical, and he'd chosen his next hiding place with care. Sergeant Dan Waters came in carrying a laptop and a stack of printed reports. His expression was the kind that told Morgan the day was about to get heavier. "We pulled Crestwood's financials," Waters said, setting the stack down. "Sparse activity. No credit card use in the last week. No ATM withdrawals. Nothing from his usual grocery or gas stations." "So he's living off cash," Morgan said. Waters nodded. "That's what I figured. But there's more." He opened the laptop. A city map came up, digital, dotted with colored markers. Tech traced the last 2 weeks of Crestwood's delivery routes, cross-referenced them with public camera footage, employee logs, and doorbell camera uploads. "And?" Morgan asked. "There's a cluster." Waters pointed at the map. A bunch of consistent pings around the industrial district, old warehouses, abandoned rail offices, empty storage units. "And nobody questioned him walking around a dead zone like that?" Morgan asked. "He wore a courier uniform," Waters said. "Nobody questions the guy carrying boxes." Morgan sighed. "So he was scouting?" Waters nodded. "And considering the man's background in maintenance work, knowing he likes quiet and familiarity, he wouldn't pick a random spot." Morgan stared at the board again, mind piecing together fragments with slow precision. He wouldn't hide somewhere new. He'd hide somewhere he already used. Waters gave him a knowing look. "Exactly." A moment later, a detective hurried in, holding a tablet. "We got a hit," she said. "Camera from a storage complex off Baxter Line. Timestamp, 2 hours ago. Blue sedan. Looks like Crestwood's plates." Morgan straightened. "Pull up the footage." She handed him the tablet. A grainy, slightly angled view of an access gate appeared. Snowflakes drifted through the frame. A blue sedan rolled past the keypad. The driver leaned out just long enough to enter a code, too far from the camera to capture the digits. Then the car drove in. "Do we know which unit?" Morgan asked. "No," she said. "Old system. Doesn't log individual unit activity. The manager says half the place is empty. People store old furniture, broken appliances, or just forget their units exist." Morgan grabbed his coat. "We're going." 20 minutes later, their unmarked sedan turned into Baxter Line, an industrial artery of abandoned brick buildings, rusted metal signage, and wide stretches of cracked asphalt. Snow-laden clouds hung low as if pressed against the rooftops. The storage facility stood behind a chain-link fence crowned with lazy strands of barbed wire. A faded sign read, "Midtown Self-Storage, 24/7 Access." Waters slowed to a stop outside the gate. 2 patrol cars were already positioned nearby. The officers stepped out to greet them. "You sweep the perimeter?" Morgan asked. The lead officer nodded. "Yes, sir. No signs of a break. No fresh footprints except the tire tracks from his car." Morgan looked at the streak of black rubber leading through the gate and into the rows of metal units beyond. Crestwood was inside. He wasn't running anymore. He was hiding, or maybe waiting. The gate buzzed open as the manager, a nervous, balding man in a heavy parka, typed in a master code. "He didn't rent a unit under his name," the man insisted. "I checked twice. If he's here, he's using an old unit or one left unlocked." Morgan nodded. "Stay outside. We'll handle the sweep." The officers split into pairs, each assigned a different row of storage units. Morgan and Waters took the center lane. The units stretched out in long, numbered rows. Frost clung to the metal surfaces, and the air smelled like aluminum and stagnant cold. Morgan's boots made hollow echoes with each step. "He knows we're coming," Waters said quietly. "Or he knows we will come sooner or later," Morgan replied. "But men like Crestwood, they don't think like prey. They think like someone fixing a problem. They slow down. They restore control." Waters looked uneasy. "Meaning?" "Meaning he might not be planning to run," Morgan said softly. "He might be planning his next move." They reached Unit 117. A faint trail of slush led toward the back side of it. Morgan noticed it first, a footprint, then another, then a slight smudge on the metal latch as if someone had touched it with wrapped fingers. Morgan signaled Waters. Both drew closer, not with guns raised, but with caution, scanning for movement, sound, anything. Morgan tried the latch. Unlocked. He exchanged a look with Waters. Then pulled the door up 2 feet. It rattled loudly. Cold air spilled out, dark, quiet, still. Morgan crouched and peered inside. A light flickered somewhere near the back of the unit, soft, unstable, like a battery lantern about to die. Metal shelves lined the sides, boxes, plastic tubs, old service uniforms, a rolled-up sleeping bag, and near the back something else, a makeshift workstation, maps, notes, a stack of courier labels circled with red pen, a maintenance badge from Ridgeway Court. Waters muttered, "He was planning something." Morgan stepped inside carefully. "No, this is what he used, not what he's planning next." Waters followed, glancing around. "But he's not here. Car's here, but he's gone." Morgan's eyes swept every inch of the room, his instincts tightening. "He's close," Morgan said. "Too close to abandon the car." Then he saw it, a side door at the back of the unit, a maintenance exit built into the older units, the kind that hadn't been updated when the facility changed ownership. Morgan approached it slowly. He pressed his fingers to the metal, still warm. "He went through here," Morgan said, "minutes ago." Waters swallowed. "Where does it lead?" Morgan pushed the door open. Wind rushed in, carrying the smell of cold brick and diesel fumes. On the other side stretched the rear end of the old rail depot. Empty platforms, rusted cargo crates, and a stretch of cracked concrete that seemed to disappear into the gray horizon. Waters exhaled. "He's using the depot as cover." Morgan nodded. "And if he's desperate enough, he could be watching us right now." The thought hung in the air like frost. The chase had entered its final terrain. Quiet, empty, concealed. A place where sound died quickly and shadows lingered too long. Morgan stepped through the door. "We find him before he disappears into the city again." And for the first time since the case began, Morgan felt the outcome tightening around them. They were close, too close for Crestwood to stay still, and much too close for him to run. Even with the bitter wind slicing through his coat collar, Detective Morgan Elliston felt the air around the old rail depot grow unnaturally still, like the space held its breath, waiting for something to break. The industrial district was always quiet at this hour, but this was different. This quiet carried intent. Crestwood had slipped out through the maintenance door behind Unit 117 only minutes before Morgan pushed it open. No doubt about that. The metal had still been warm beneath Morgan's glove, the faintest sheen of condensation showing where someone's breath had hit it recently, and the snow outside showed a disturbance, subtle, careful, but unmistakable to a trained eye. A heel pivot, a compressed footprint, a slight drag where fabric had brushed the powder. Crestwood hadn't vanished. He had moved, but he was still here. Morgan and Sergeant Dan Waters stepped out into the open yard behind Midtown Self-Storage, their boots grinding across the gritty frost. Pale winter light filtered through the gray sky, turning every sheet of metal and concrete slab into a cold mirror. The abandoned rail depot stretched ahead. Several acres of rusted platforms, rotting wooden ramps, empty freight crates, and half-dead floodlights that flickered whenever the wind jolted the wiring. "This place is a ghost town," Waters muttered, scanning the silent geometry of broken rails. "You sure he came through here?" Morgan didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on a set of footprints winding toward the loading platform. The shape, the depth, the staggered angle. Crestwood was moving fast, but not panicked. He was thinking, calculating. "He's here," Morgan said. "And he's trying to find a vantage point." Waters exhaled, puffing out white breath. "Meaning he might already be watching us." "Meaning exactly that." Morgan moved cautiously, arms relaxed, nothing aggressive in his posture. The goal wasn't confrontation, not yet. The goal was containment. Crestwood was unpredictable. He wasn't a mastermind, but he was resourceful. Dangerously so. A man who understood building layouts, maintenance shafts, blind spots, camera angles, someone who could make a hiding place out of any dark corner. They reached the platform. Morgan crouched by a cluster of footprints and leaned in. The snow pattern told a larger story. Multiple turns, a pause. Weight shifted heavily to the outside edge of one boot. "He stopped here," Morgan murmured. Waters glanced around. "To look back?" "Not just look," Morgan said. "Plan." Morgan stood, scanning the elevated walkway. Above them, the old switching office hung over the tracks on metal supports. Rusted stairs zigzagged upward. Windows clouded with dust reflected the pale sky. Waters followed Morgan's gaze. "If I were trying to keep eyes on my surroundings, that's where I'd go." Morgan nodded. "And if I needed time to think, to figure out my next move, that's where I'd stay." They approached the staircase slowly, carefully. Each step groaned beneath their weight, dust shaking loose and tumbling down like powdery sand. Halfway up, something caught Morgan's eye, a faint smear on the railing, clear enough to see in the right angle of light. Fabric, not blood, not anything disturbing, just a thin fuzz from a coat sleeve. Crestwood's coat. "He's definitely here," Waters said. Morgan lifted his head just as a soft metallic knock echoed somewhere above, like a toolbox lid shifting in the breeze, or like someone moving. Waters steadied his breathing. "You ready?" "No," Morgan said honestly, "but it doesn't matter." They climbed the final steps. The switching office door hung partially open. Inside, dust motes spun in the cold air. The room was wide, dim, and cluttered with old equipment. Metal cabinets, crates, rusted levers, scraps of wiring. A collapsed desk sat near the windows, offering a clear view over the entire depot yard. Morgan stepped inside, each footfall soft but deliberate. The silence was heavy. Waters scanned the left side of the room. Morgan moved right. Both were hyper-focused, listening for breath, shifting weight, the creak of a floorboard. But all they heard was the low hum of the wind forcing itself through broken window sills. Finally, Morgan reached the far window. From there, the entire industrial district opened like a map. Storage units, rail lines, and the narrow corridors between rusted train cars. "This is perfect cover," Morgan said softly. "He could see us coming from anywhere." Waters checked behind a crate. "Then where the hell is he?" Morgan inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing at something on the floor. Boot marks, fresh, pivoting near the window, then a long streak across the dusty concrete, like someone dragging a heavy box or sliding through a gap. Morgan crouched. A vent, large enough for someone to squeeze through. The screws loosened. Cover shifted aside. "He crawled out," Morgan said. Waters knelt next to him. "Where does it lead?" Morgan angled his flashlight into the darkness. The narrow duct sloped downward behind the office wall and into the supporting structure below. Not a ventilation system, an access shaft left behind from old construction. "He's using the framework under the depot," Morgan said. "The maintenance tunnels." Waters shook his head. "Great, that's a maze." "Yeah," Morgan said, "but a predictable maze. He's going somewhere he thinks we can't follow." Waters frowned. "So we follow." Morgan looked at him. "We follow." The maintenance tunnels beneath the depot were colder than the surface level, dark, cramped, and cut by wandering beams of light bleeding through broken floor panels above. Old wiring ran along the walls, some still humming faintly with electricity. The air smelled like rusted metal and damp wood. Morgan and Waters moved carefully, flashlights cutting through the black. "Crestwood's not just hiding," Morgan said, his voice low but steady. "He's buying time. He doesn't know how close we are, but he knows we're close enough. This isn't a man trying to disappear forever." Waters lifted his light toward a corner where dust had been disturbed. "Then what is he?" "A man who believes he still has a chance," Morgan replied. "Maybe to justify what he did. Maybe to convince himself he didn't mean it. Maybe to rewrite the ending." Waters exhaled slowly. "Men like him don't rewrite endings." "No," Morgan said. "They just prolong them." As they turned a corner in the tunnel, Morgan paused again. Footprints, clear as day in the dust, moving deeper, angling left, then stopping abruptly. Waters leaned in. "Why'd he stop here?" Morgan looked ahead. The tunnel reached an old steel door, slightly open. A strip of white winter light spilled across the floor. Morgan tensed. Because this is where he decided his next move. He pushed the door open with the back of his hand. The door opened to the outside edge of the depot, near a cluster of idling freight crates. The snow there was disturbed, scuffed, uneven. Crestwood had stepped through this door recently, and he had waited here. Morgan walked forward slowly, examining the tracks. "He was watching the storage unit," Morgan said softly. "Watching us search it." Waters straightened. "You think he was standing right here when we pulled up?" Morgan nodded. He wanted to know how close we were, and now he does. Waters scanned the desolate yard. Which direction would he run? Morgan looked across the towering rows of crates, the rail lines, the empty loading platforms. Not far, he said. He's not looking to escape St. Helena. He's not looking to flee state lines. He's looking for one more place to think, to brace himself. And then? Waters asked. Morgan swallowed. And then he'll finally realize he has nowhere left to go.